Incremental attribution optimization has just dropped within Meta Ads. This started rolling out about a month ago. We have access to it on about 10 to 20% of our accounts right now. If you don't have it in your account, it should be within your account over the course of the next month. Now, you can find this within the ad set level under hidden settings and attribution. You can switch this over to incremental attribution. Now, how this is working, or at least Meta's description of it, is that it's optimizing delivery for incremental conversions using sophisticated models that predict whether a conversion is caused by an ad. Effectively, what this is a conversion lift study that's running consistently across the ad set with a control and a treatment group. It's then doing a difference by difference analysis on the control versus treatment group to be able to give you better clarity into whether the ads are actually driving incremental conversions or whether it's just over attributing from people that were going to buy anyway. Now, the reality is that switching your attribution method to 7-day click or 1-day click in itself kind of solves for this. But we have some really interesting data in this video that's going to give you an idea of how incremental or how much clarity you have over incrementality at each of these attribution levels, because we have the data within accounts to showcase this. Now, we've gone through how it works. When should you actually use it? Because now you can, rather than going for standard attribution, you can actually run this within ad sets. Now, we're running tests at the moment, so we don't have conclusive results on whether this is a better model. Now, Meta claims that it being a new feature, something like 27% better new customer revenue when you're using incremental attribution. I kind of believe it. I do think that if you're just feeding in data on incremental high-intent users, that you are going to see better incrementality within the campaign. It makes total sense. One of the issues that I have with optimizing for 7-day click or 1-day view is that you're having those view-through conversions included within the optimization of the ad set, which is probably going to lead to over-optimization towards people that have already visited site, which is just going to turn those ad sets into heavy middle of funnel or bottom of funnel retargeting ad sets. So that's why we'll generally always skew towards 7-day click. But just as is with 7-day click, 1-day view versus just running 7-day click, there's a caveat, which is that if you don't have enough data on 7-day click attribution, you're going to be in a position where you're actually kind of better off including 1-day view so that you can have a larger data set for the ad set to actually optimize towards. It then has more psychographic data points that it can look for similarities across, and you should theoretically have better targeting. We're actually running multiple tests on this at the moment, and so we should actually have some data to back whether that is the case or not, and it's not just theoretical application. But where I wouldn't use incremental attribution is on a low conversion count account. And so if you're a 7-figure business, high AOV, it's questionable whether you should go into incremental attribution because you're just not going to have a lot of data. Reality is that a lot of your conversions probably aren't incremental, in which case you're going to end up with no data being fed back into the campaigns. Will that be optimal? Will it force it to serve to new audiences potentially? Or will it just negatively impact you and you won't get out of a quote unquote learning phase? Also a potential. So really, any recommendations being made right now is purely theoretical based, but I want to show you some data. So this is 2 different accounts. This account over a 30-day basis is attributing about $1 million in revenue. You can see that we're using exclusively 7-day click on this account. And so when we're looking at total revenue attributed, this is directly matching our 7-day click column, which also sits at about $1 million. Now, when we look at 1-day click attribution, this drops to about $500,000. And so this is pretty standard. You end up seeing about a 40% drop off as you go to 1-day click, really depending on the individual account and time to purchase. Now, the question is, what is the more realistic view of incrementality? Is 1-day click giving us the best visibility into the impact that our ads are actually having within the business, or is 7-day click giving us a more accurate representation, or does it sit somewhere in the middle? And the answer is, based on incremental attribution, it sits somewhere in the middle. So 7-day click still seems to have a little bit of over attribution correlated to this new measurement system that Meta is giving us access to. And 1-day click seems to be a little bit aggressive on the lower end. And so when we actually look at return on ad spend figures here, we're making an assumption that this is at about a 4.77, and based on some quasi-geolift experiments that we've done, it validates it, that it should be at about a 4.77. But once we go to incremental, it says 3.25. And so this is interesting. It just gives us another data point to provide us with clarity as to whether these campaigns are incremental or not. It gets even more interesting once you look at a campaign by campaign level and you start to identify where there are larger drop-offs. For example, in this campaign right here, we're seeing a considerably larger drop-off from 7-day click to incremental attributed conversions, which means that this is something that we should probably look into and troubleshoot and figure out, why is Meta saying that this is less incremental? In fact, I know why this is less incremental. It's because there's some ad sets in here running without exclusions. And so you can actually start to draw direct correlations about account structure with this additional data set. So it's a nice to have. Is it perfect? No, not necessarily, because there's the downside that all conversion lift experiments have the downside of when it's in platform, which is that it's completely reliant on attribution. Attribution is not a perfect science. Therefore, this number isn't going to be a perfect representation of causal inference. You're going to have better causation from using business level metrics like new customer revenue within the business, but it's still a nice to have. I'll give you one more data set. So this is in USD, about $300,000 to $400,000 a month. We have a mix of 7-day click and 1-day view in this account because we're actually doing a fair bit of experimentation to see whether better performance at a 7-day click level actually comes out of 7-day click, 1-day view optimization, which we'll have a video on in a few weeks once we have more conclusive data. We're not going to rush that data set out. But then when we look at the breakdown in this account, it gets really interesting. So the difference between 7-day click and 1-day click is almost nothing. And that's because average order value here is quite low. It's about $90, and it's an impulse buy. And so people will buy very, very quickly here. And it allows us to make decisions faster in the platform, which trails out to a bunch of other tertiary impacts as to how we approach media buying and creative introduction, etc. But more importantly, when we look at incremental attribution here again, once again, it's sitting pretty much right in the middle of 1-day click and 7-day click, almost to the point that you could maybe even argue that incremental attribution is just 7-day click plus 1-day click divided by 2. They're just kind of choosing the middle and saying that's what's incremental. But that is a really nice data set to have, because it's telling us that our decision-making framework of going for 7-day click attribution in 99% of our accounts is likely the most incremental observation of actual account performance. Now, we could go to 1-day click, but I think there would probably be disadvantages there of restricting data sets too heavily and us then having to really make positive adjustments on the attributed results that we're seeing. And so right now, the impact that this is having on our internal decision-making is that it's just solidified that using 7-day click is the right model to be going for on 90% of businesses, obviously with caveats in place there. And once we look at attributed ROAS, we see a similar story. And so account levels 3, 7-day click, which is what we're using to make decisions, is a 2. Incremental is 2.07, so a very slight dip. And then 1-day click sits down at a 1.86. It is worth noting that acquisition MER within this business sits higher than 7-day click, and Meta is a 100% driver of pretty much all new customer revenue. And so 7-day click actually under attributes in accordance with quasi-geolift experiments that we do within this business, as well as just correlating to acquisition MER over time. If you look at 7-day click and platform, you look at acquisition MER over time, acquisition MER is always higher than 7-day click, despite there being no other primary driver of revenue within this particular business. And so we actually think 7-day click under attributes slightly here. So it's interesting to see that incremental attribution is going even further down under 7-day click, which means that ultimately I still think that you need to be referencing out to store level metrics. This is a great new addition. We're going to be doing a lot of testing here in terms of actually optimizing for incremental attribution, and we'll look to get some conclusive data sets here. The issue with gathering data here is that you really need to go all in or not all in at all, because what you want to be measuring is correlation to back-end revenue lift. You don't want to be using in-platform performance attributed figures to be able to determine whether incremental attribution optimization is better. But that's going to give us another point of data, which we can obviously include in a future video that we put out about the efficaciousness of incremental attribution.